Huntingdon, Cambridgeshire. It wasn't the prettiest place to die, but then again, where is? She was taking a shortcut through unfamiliar territory. He was running an illegal errand on ground he called his own. Neither would have wanted the street, with its vandalised lights and graffiti-covered hoardings, to be their final view of life. But we don't often get what we want. She saw him first. The lone surviving street lamp dropped a pool of weak yellow light that was just enough to reveal him rounding the corner, 50 yards away on the opposite side of the road. Despite the mild July night, he was hunched over, his hands thrust deep into the pockets of his green nylon bomber jacket. Strands of straggly blonde hair shielded a thin, cratered face. The Doc Marten boots, visible under 2 short jeans, made no noise against the uneven, fractured footpath. Save for the lack of a skinhead haircut, he looked like he had stepped out of a documentary on right-wing hooliganism. In the moment she thought to turn around and go a different way, he looked up, alerted by the click of her stiletto heels. As their eyes met, he smiled and sneered simultaneously, his features distorting like a grotesque skull. She knew that turning away was no longer an option. He took his hands out of his pockets. She could see the left was empty, but the right seemed to be concealing something. Steadying her pace, she shifted the chain-link strap of her clutch bag from across her body, so that it rested on her left shoulder. He quickened his step and crossed the street. She moved into the middle of the footpath and kept walking, watching. He was a couple of inches taller than her, and as he came closer, she could see he was thin and sinewy. Not a bodybuilder by any means, but he looked strong, agile, quick, like an urban fox, thinner than it should be, but capable, furtive, vicious. When he was a few yards away, she grasped her clutch bag, letting the chain fall from her shoulder, and moved to her right to avoid him. He blocked her. She stopped walking and stepped left, placing herself back in the middle of the path. He stepped to his right, directly in front of her again. She stood still and tried to be polite. "I'm sorry, please, after you," she said, and extended her left arm to indicate where he should step. He ignored her and stepped forward. "I don't think so." His accent was rough-edged London. His lips were cracked and looked dry. Yet as he spoke, spittle flew from his mouth. It hit her face. She didn't reach to wipe it away. He smelt of cigarettes and body odour laced with an underlying stench of stale beer. Pale skin, almost vampiric, was stretched over sunken cheeks that cowered under narrowed, dulled eyes. Pockmarks had joined to form craters, valleys and crevices etched into his face. He stepped closer. "I'm going to enjoy this." His speed of movement surprised her. His right hand came up and elaborately flicked a butterfly knife open. Its 4-inch blade shone briefly in the dim light. He held it inches from her chest, whilst his left hand thrust forward and caught her by the throat. She gagged at the force of his grip and began to feel him applying upward pressure. He was trying to lift her off the ground. She heard a voice from long ago. "Cara Wright, how many times do I have to tell you? The first time you should see an attacker's knife is when it's exiting from your body. If you see it before then, you know it's all for show." Cara gave a wry smile as the words of her first instructor rang out in her head. She swung her right arm up and over her attacker's left and plunged the side of her fist down into the bend of his elbow. The downward force ripped his hand away from her throat, and she gasped at the release. Simultaneously, she flicked her left hand and arced the short chain of the bag around his right wrist. As she pulled down, his knife hand was drawn away and his whole body turned slightly, forcing his right leg forward. She planted her left foot solidly on the pavement and extended her right foot in a vicious front snap kick.